Warnford.
Hello, I'm Cliff Proctor. This is Radio Warnford, and we've got a special guest joining us today on Radio Warnford, and that's Tony Blackburn. Hello, Tony.
Yeah, hello. Nice to be with you.
And we've got a number of questions that we'd like to ask you during the interview. The first one is, you've been on many radio stations, from Radio Caroline to Radio 2, and certainly in the 60s with Radio Caroline, Radio London, then on to Radio 1. How did you find them in terms of management style?
Well, Radio Caroline was much more free-going, I suppose, really you could call it. It was more of a piratical station than anything else. Whereas Radio London, it was very professionally run. It was the one that I preferred. It was run by the Americans, and the whole idea of it was to make money, and it did. You know, Radio Caroline was, I don't know, it was just run on a very basic sort of way, but Radio London was the one that I loved because it brought in commercial radio into Great Britain from the American style. The American style at the time, the top 40 American radio system, was the one that I loved. And if you listen to commercial radio now, it's run along those lines much more than Radio Caroline, although Radio Caroline is the one that everybody remembers.
Sure. Certainly, there's some recordings on the internet of Radio London, and it certainly sounded like a fun station to be at. It
was, yeah. Radio London was the one that I absolutely adored. It was I was on Radio Caroline to start off with for 2 years, but I was doing the breakfast show one day, and we'd heard that an American station was going to be with us, and the mist cleared one morning, and there it was, Big L, Radio London, the MV Galaxy. It was a much bigger ship than Radio Caroline, and I don't know, it was just the professionalism and those wonderful Pam's jingles that I loved.
Oh, and, indeed.
Yeah, it was one of those stations that I really wanted to be on, and eventually, achieved it, and did the breakfast show there for a year before joining Radio 1.
It's sort of jumping ahead to a question coming ahead, but some of the jingles you had on Radio London, you're using at the weekend on Radio 2 now, aren't you?
Yes, I am. Yeah, when I took over Pick of the Pops, one of the things I did want to do was first to change it, was I wanted to do the show live, and I wanted to introduce those wonderful 60s jingles into the program. And I was very lucky, Bob Shannon, the head of Radio 2, to start off with, didn't want me to do the show live, because it had been recorded for so long.
Sure.
But he said, well, if you think that it would sound better doing it live, then let's do it live. And haven't turned back since, because to me, live radio is always the best. It always has been, always will be. And the jingles, the 60s jingles, they were a part of it. And I managed to get them re-recorded. They're the same backing tracks that we used out in the 60s.
Sure.
But they're slightly re-sung, obviously. And they were reproduced in this country as well, because the original American singers, unfortunately, no longer with us, because it was so many years ago.
So you actually had a lot of say in some of the jingles you had on Pick of the Pops as well, then?
Absolutely, yes. I was very lucky. We chose them together. My best friend, Phil Swern, Phil the Collector Swern,
yes,
as you know.
Indeed.
He produces the sound of the 60s, and he's been producing Pick of the Pops for quite some time. And for a long time, he wanted me to be on it, and the opportunity arose, and, sort of grabbed it. And it's very lucky to say it's put on a massive audience over the last 3 years. In fact, I think we've put on an extra 1 million listeners.
Well,
I think that's all down to, Pick of the Pops. The whole concept of it is a brilliant idea, and just revamping it a little bit, freshening it up as we did about 3 or 4 years ago, and making it live, and putting those 60s jingles in and refreshing them from time to time as well. That's what's done it, I think.
Well, it's my weekend fix of radio. I do enjoy it. I really enjoy listening to it. I have a personal radio on my bike and sort of go out for a ride around where I live in Warwickshire, and really enjoy listening to the show.
Yeah, that's good.
I noticed you've also started getting some jam jingles in as well, and you've got the Pams and the jam jingles as well. Which ones do you prefer generally?
I probably prefer the original 60s ones, the Pams jingles. They're probably the best of the lot. The fastest thing in the air, and music hour by hour and things like that. Those are the jingles that I was playing out on the pirate ships, and those were the ones that I really love more than any of the others. And I think the original ones, the some of those ones are the best ever made. I think I don't know, nowadays they can't seem to, the jingles, I don't think some of the people who run the radio stations nowadays realise how good they were and how they really contribute to a radio station sound.
Another question, I think you've touched on it a bit. In the early days, how much say did you have in the music that you played on the radio, and was it different between different stations?
I didn't have any say at all in the music I played on Big L Radio London. Radio Caroline was the same. The music was chosen for us. When I opened up Radio 1 in '67, I had a lot of say in the music that went into the program then. And the breakfast show I did on Radio 1, most of the music, in fact, all of the music I chose on that with a producer, but I had basically the final say.
Oh, wow. So actually, it was sort of different from what I was thinking. I thought you might have had more say on the pirate stations. We actually had a lot of say on Radio 1. Oh, that's fantastic. No,
Radio London, the pirate ship Radio London, it was a top 40 radio format, and basically the show that I presented there on Big L Radio London, it was a rotation of hits, which was the American style of doing it. And so the music was chosen for us. And it was a great, great system. And that system, the Top 40 radio system, that's what I introduced on Radio 1 on my breakfast show. You know, we used to say a Top 40 format on that show. It's the best radio format ever. And it was that was the one that I wanted to bring to the BBC, which I did. And we used it on our program, on the breakfast show, because it's the best format ever.
Indeed.
You do it's based on a system, the American system, which is based on a half-an-hour rotation of hits. I'm getting a little bit technical here, but it goes 1 to 10, 11 to 40, climber, in other words, new record, oldie, and then you go back to 1 to 10, 11 to 40, and then a new release, or an American hit, I should say. And that's the style we introduced, and it's the best radio format ever.
Indeed, and certainly something I enjoy as well.
Yeah.
You've been on a number of pioneering radio stations, including Capital Gold in London, which was one of the first sort of purely classic hit golden oldie stations in the country. How did it feel being on that station, and was it a bit like Radio London and back in the 60s again? When
it first started, I opened up the 7-day-a-week one actually and that was great when it first started because it had people like Kenny Everett on it. We had David Hamilton, Dave Cash, and it was a great station. The problem with it was that it wasn't on FM, and we were always battling against the FM station. And we weren't allowed really to top that station because at the time Capital FM was the number one station, and it was only we came along and we did really, really well on it. And being on AM was a real problem. And it's a shame that in this country that we've never had an oldie station on FM, a proper oldie station on FM, and that's been the problem. And that has always been, I think, the stupidity of the radio system in this country. In fact, I went to the radio authority and suggested that we had an FM station, and they wouldn't allow it. And we never had one. We never had a proper one in this country. That's been, and it's all been a battle to get an oldie station on FM, and it's never happened.
No. I suppose with DAB coming along, at least you can hear some of the stations if they are in stereo. But but DAB is, it's okay, but it will never, I don't think, take off in this country to the extent it was meant to have done, because we haven't got it. Most people in their cars don't have DAB. No,
so I'm not a great lover of DAB. I think FM terrific, and you don't have to put a special aerial up or anything like that. But unfortunately in this country, although DAB, quite a lot of people have it, I don't think it's really the answer. And I think probably, the internet now has taken over a little bit. But it's just a tragedy that Capital Gold never got on FM.
No, indeed. Stranger to chart shows, and having presented the Radio 1 chart show in the late 70s and early 80s, and now you're doing Pick of the Pops. How does it feel presenting Pick of the Pops on a chart you've done on Radio 1 back in the day?
I know, it's funny, really. I mean, Pick of the Pops is the one that I love. It's a great show to do, and particularly being on Radio 2, which is the number one station now in Europe. We have over 15 million people, which is incredible.
It is.
2 million more now than Radio 1. So to be on that station, apart from anything else, is just a dream come true, as far as I'm concerned. And to do Pick of the Pops, tremendous stuff. I love doing it. I prefer doing it, actually, to the original Top 40 show that I did on Radio 1. Yeah, it's just more fun, and everything about it is great. I wasn't a great lover, to be honest with you, of doing chart shows. They're really just a rundown, that's number one, and that's number two, and that's number three. But with Pick of the Pops, I think I've sort of been able to be myself on it a little bit, let's put it that way, and do a few gags and all the rest of it. So therefore, doing Pick of the Pops, great. The Top 40 show, although it was a great show to do, I didn't get such a kick out of doing it as I do Pick of the Pops. There's something about Pick of the Pops. It's been going for years and years and years, and it's a very special show to do. I mean, Alan Freeman, I thought, was probably one of the best people doing the show. And I'm glad I didn't have to take over from Alan Freeman, who was terrific. I took over from Dale Winton, who was very, very good, but it wasn't a live show. And so, therefore, to take over from Dale Winton, with all due respect to Dale, and I love him very much, but it was easier to do, I think, possibly taking over from Alan Freeman, who was the master at it.
Absolutely.
Whenever I do the chart rundown on Pick of the Pops, in my mind, I have Alan Freeman's voice there because he was so good at it. And he was a great friend of mine. I knew Alan very well, and both Phil Swern, Alan Freeman, and myself, we were all great friends. And in fact, we used to go round to Phil Swern's mum and dad's house every Sunday, and we used to have Sunday lunch together, and then I'd go off and do the Top 40.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, good to look back on those days as well. Who are your influences in radio, and who do you rate today?
I think probably the only person that really influenced me was Pete Murray. I think Pete Murray was a great broadcaster, and I used to listen to him on Radio Luxembourg, and I used to love his programs. Apart from that, I don't think I've been influenced particularly by anybody. I think today, probably Steve Wright is somebody I think is a terrific broadcaster. I think Steve Wright's great. And Ken Bruce. I think Ken Bruce is excellent as well. There are a lot of good broadcasters around at the moment. Graham Norton, for instance, I think does a tremendous show on Saturday as well. I follow him, and I think he's terrific. Act,
isn't he?
Yeah, very, very few people are good on television and radio, but I think Graham Norton's one of them, and I love his program.
Yeah, I agree with that. I sort of have this theory of better for TV, better for radio, sort of with presenters. But certainly you say like Graham Norton or Noel Edmonds, somebody like that, they're sort of good for both, aren't they, really? Yeah, very good. Yeah, I mean Noel Edmonds, when he was on radio, was excellent as well. And, television, he's doing Deal or No Deal now, which I think it's incredible that he manages to make so much out of a program that really, funny enough, has nothing really there. It's just guessing boxes and things like that. But he's a master at television, Noel. I think he's tremendous. Indeed. You've been both part of the BBC and commercial radio, and they're very different today as what they were, say, 20, 30 years ago. Do you think the creativity and the excitement has gone from radio now?
I think in commercial radio, unfortunately, it has, yes. I think it's become so formatted and... stations that... Actually, I work for Magic, but the one in the north, and the one in the north is totally different to the one in London, and it's going to be on DAB nationwide and all the rest of it. But, of course, to me, playing sort of, 10 records in a row and giving a time check is not radio.
No.
So, therefore, it doesn't do it for me in commercial radio. Apart from LBC, which I think is brilliant. I think LBC is terrific. But apart from that, commercial radio, for me, I'm afraid, has lost it. It's a shame. BBC, on the other hand, local radio and national radio, I think is tremendous. And for me, I've always been a lover of the BBC. And I think we don't really appreciate how good the BBC is. And, there's always this controversy going on about the license fee. Well, my argument to that, or my answer to that is the license fee. It's worth every penny. Without the BBC, I think this country would be in a very sad state. And I think it would be interesting to switch the BBC off for 4 weeks or so.
Yeah.
And, I think then we'd really appreciate it, because it's the best broadcasting organisation in the world.
Oh, without a doubt.
And without it, I think it would be a sad state broadcasting. I wouldn't like to be in a country that only had commercial radio. It'd be disastrous.
No, and I think Radio 2 has sort of tapped into where commercial radio was probably 20, 30 years ago themselves, and sort of offering
Well,
that.
yes, I mean, I always loved commercial radio in the early days, and I remember going to America and listening to it and thinking, well, this is what we should have in Britain before we had commercial radio, and the idea of the pirate radio ships was to bring about commercial radio, which eventually it did, but it didn't sort of suggest that we should have commercial radio with no personality, and that's what unfortunately it's developed into, and I think it's a tragedy, and I think it's such a shame, and it was never meant to be like that.
No. Well, I've got a couple more questions here. One of my team here at Radio Warmford's asked me to ask a couple of these. So what was it like being a pirate?
It was terrific fun. I mean, being a pirate in the 60s was just fantastic. I mean, I remember I joined it about 3 months after it started, and it was just very exciting. It was something that hadn't been done before. It will never be done again, and to live out on the North Sea, I loved. I was there for 3 years. I was very proud of what we did out there, because it did revolutionize radio in this country. As good as the BBC was, and still is to this day, it needed competition against it.
Indeed.
And that's what we did. And I'm very, very proud of being a part of that. And, being aboard a ship with people like Kenny Everett and people like Dave Cash and people like that, it was tremendous. And I'm really proud of being out there. It was very exciting. I think we did what was needed to be done to bring about competition for the BBC. And I'm really proud to have been a part of that era. It was very exciting. I loved it, every moment of it. And, I look back at some of the early videos of going on board Radio Caroline and Big L Radio London, and I just am so proud to have been a part of that.
Well, back in 2006, I did a special programme over our Christmas period, and it was called Music of the 60s, the Pirate Years, and I'd managed to sort of get some of the recordings of the stations and the records that they played, so I managed to put in all the tracks together with the actual DJs announcing them, and then I was sort of linking together with which stations they were from and sort of the history. So it started off with Radio Caroline launching with Not Fade Away, and then the second part, it was 2 1-hour shows, and you finished off with Radio London closing down with A Day in the Life. And it had all the recordings of people like yourself, Keith Skews, and Tommy Vance and various others, and sort of all the jingles and everything that they played. And when I was doing the research for the show and finding all the recordings, the thing that really came over to me was sort of how much fun you guys must have been having out there, because you all sounded like you were having a great laugh on the air and really enjoying everything that you were doing, even though sort of probably living out on the ships at times must have been quite hard with the sea conditions at times.
Well, it was. I mean, we were having fun, and it was... The interesting thing about Radio Caroline and Big L Radio London was that it was a family, and people were tuning in to hear a family because we were all living together out there. And, of course, you can't get that feel when you're on shore because, when I opened up Radio 1, it was very exciting, and I loved it. I loved being a part of that. But nevertheless, when you did your program, you went home or you went somewhere else. Whereas with the pirate stations, we were actually living out there for 2 weeks at a time, and then we had a week off. So it was very special. And although Radio 1, I thought, was very, very good, we never could recreate that family atmosphere because it wasn't a family.
Indeed, indeed. What was your best adventure during your time then?
What on the pirate ship?
Yeah.
I think, the one that I will remember more than anything else was probably being shipwrecked when I was on Radio Caroline, and they were broadcasting distress signals. It was a 10-4 scale, and I think I'm right in saying, well, in fact it was. It was Anglia Television. They were broadcasting distress signals to us, and they were saying that we were drifting and things like that, and we were watching BBC, who really didn't give a damn about us, really. So, and I remember Norman St. John coming down and saying, you've got to get up, because I was in bed, because I was getting up early to do the breakfast show.
Sure.
And I remember going up to the deck, and I think it was the captain that shone this very, very bright light, and we thought we were around about a mile and a half offshore or so. But there were just people walking along the seafront, and there was a thudding noise, and as I remember it, there was the water was just going over the decks, and we suddenly realised that we'd been shipwrecked.
Wow.
We were taken off by a breeches buoy, and that was it. That was my most amazing memory, I suppose, of Radio Caroline. Being shipwrecked. There aren't many people who've had that experience, but it was incredible. And I think if we'd been about sort of 300 or 400 yards to the right, we'd have broken up, because we just came in at the right place. But we were very lucky. I think it was a very dangerous situation, but as I was only 21 years old at the time, it was just a great adventure.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for doing the interview, Tony. It's Tony,
pleasure.
Tony Blackburn of Radio 2 fame and Pick of the Pops, joining us here on Radio Warnford. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
All the best.
See you then.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.